All right. Welcome to Utilizing Camera to Cloud Workflow and Production presented by Sigma. My name is Graham. I am a director of photography. I'm a member of Local 600, which is our union here in the States. I'm a member of the Motion Picture Council for the Producers Guild of America. I've made 8 features and I've worked with a bunch of different networks that we'll get into in a second. And I'm here today thanks to the good folks at Sigma. And I'm also a Sigma Cine ambassador. And in front of me, this is the Sigma FP camera with a 65mm Cine Prime on the front. And then we have a Ninja 5 monitor with an Atomos Connect module. We're going to get into the whole hardware side of this, but I just want to flag that right off the bat in case you're like, what's this thing here on the table? Fully valid. What is camera to cloud? It's exactly what it sounds like. Camera, record a clip, goes in the cloud, you do something with it, right? A few steps required to get there, but not as many steps as one might think. The reason I think this is super exciting is because if you're here today, you're future facing in a certain extent. This is, I think, the future. I was a little wrong about 3D in 2009. I was like, 3D is the future. Maybe not 2008, 2009, we had integrated 3D cameras, but I'm incredibly excited about this workflow for a couple reasons that I'll get into. So it's a field perspective. So some of you guys are in post, some of you are in management. I only work in the field. I get yelled at when I move C-stands by union folks, et cetera, fully valid, but my whole career has been in the field, in the mud, in the jungle, exposing myself to radioactive material, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I'll get into that more in a second. But that is my POV, right? So I'm here to execute, deliver footage, make the project happen. I am not very theoretical. I'm not like, ooh, this may or may not work. I don't necessarily care. I did take all those film noir, German expressionism classes, et cetera, but I think I have a career because I continue to just kind of execute on the television front and in a few other places as well. Who am I? I have a weird background. Everything from RuPaul's Drag Race to documentaries that I shot at Chernobyl to feature films I sold to Netflix initially. I was on a survival show hosted by Bear Grylls where I stab an alligator at the end. And I even got a chance to work on the Last Week Tonight finale of the last season. Kelly Clarkson's show. I was an associate producer on the SimCity game in 2014. I shoot a series for Vice called Informer, in the bottom left, the creepiest mask you maybe have ever seen. I work on D&D shows like Dimension 20, improv shows like Game Changer in the upper right. I was embedded with white supremacists for the BBC. Next to that is a rom-com called Back to Lila that I produced. Dry Blood is a horror film. And Chicken Attack in the bottom right, you don't get to pick what you work on. This is about a yodeling Japanese man that got 18 million views, and it's a music video. So look, Google it later at your peril. It's such an earworm. And I love making content. I love making stuff. On Wednesday, I worked for Nick News for the first time, so I threw that logo up there. I just like making things, and that's why I think Camera to Cloud is so exciting, because I immediately went out and tried this technology. I will start by saying this tech is in its infancy, right? You're going to see a lot of content out there of people like on the side of mountains, and they're like, it records and it works perfectly. And to some extent that's true, but it does take a little bit of thought for the setup, right? I mean, it's not like, old days, power on a GoPro, you're off to the races, but it's pretty close. So on the way out here, that's a little bit of the Mojave Desert in the back there. I took a drone selfie. In the bottom right, you see sort of my setup. So that is the Sigma FP camera on top of the tripod that you see on the table in front of me. In the bottom right image, if you're looking at that, there's an iPad on top of my camera bag. And then you can't really see it, but there's actually a T-Mobile hotspot that I've hidden right here. And so a lot of the reasons I did this in a desert is because I thought, okay, I'm in remote places very often. Can I record? Does it go to the cloud? And can people collaborate on it anywhere on the planet? In this case, I hit record on the Sigma FP. I saw a little upload symbol on the Atomos Connect, and it took about 8 seconds, and then it ended up in Frame.io for collaboration. So, middle of the desert, right? So there's other test cases. You could go to like high bandwidth areas, high Wi-Fi interference areas, and you could absolutely try this tech out here. Various use cases. Documentary. I'll get into documentary more in a second. But I ended up very early in my career doing just the most dangerous and insane things, and I still do those things. And I ask myself, why every single day? And one of the reasons this tech is exciting is because anyone on the planet, I work with a lot of people in the UK, for example, they can see what we're shooting in real time. They can pivot, we can change story, et cetera, proxy files. As I said, I do scripted films as well. And often I have multiple scripted films going at the same time, multiple commercials, and I want to feel like I have a sense of being able to actually manage the content that's happening. I like being able to see it. Commercials. I did a commercial the other day for a watch brand, guys based in Rome, Paris. Everybody wanted their 2 cents, and that's fine about the commercial, but they were based kind of all over the planet. And that's tricky when you're trying to direct talent in the moment, but if you're going to a program or a platform like Frame.io, then that gives you a way to kind of see the feedback in real time, so you can make pivots that don't involve me having a AirPod in one ear, hearing the feedback in real time from somebody walking around the streets of Rome, being like, could you have her look left a little bit? Heavy VFX project too, which just added that lovely extra layer. News gathering. I don't work in news. That's not because I don't love news. I don't love that kind of broadcast. I'm just not the guy for that. So I've added that, and I want to hear your thoughts at the end about how you think this would be great in news gathering, because it's just not an area I work in. I don't work in kind of a live, streaming environment in the field. Back to documentary for a second. Small crews, large teams. So I'm doing a BBC film. It's 75 minutes long. It's, feature. BBC doesn't have any commercials, which is nice. And it's a crew of 3. So I'm running audio, I'm the director of photography, and we're hanging out with some particularly dangerous and sometimes hostile people. There's a team of about 20 or 30 people supporting us back in London, and also there's real safety concerns. So we have private security with us. But as I said from my sort of desert example earlier, it's 8 seconds from when I hit the clip until somebody in the UK is seeing that and thinking, this crowd, for example, is getting pretty large. They seem hostile. Have you considered an exit plan? Which is honestly very exciting for me as a documentary filmmaker. And then, of course, real-time story pivots. One of the things we do in kind of, hardcore, realistic, whatever you want to call it, documentaries, is we're out there in the field and we're seeing things unfold in real time. And people at home are watching the footage and they're saying, okay, you don't really have the introductory beat to X. You don't have the transitional beat. You don't have the final outro beat. And these are things, and as I'm sweating and running up the side of the Alps or whatever, this is all very good information for me. And I love that camera to cloud tech allows you to get that kind of feedback from a bunch of very intelligent producers and writers sitting back in the safety of their air-conditioned spot in the UK. Back to scripted for a moment. So, if dailies, the idea that you shoot a bunch during the day, at night, you used to, see the footage, and then you would discuss, you say, okay, this feels like the right kind of movie, this feels like the tone that we want to capture. But if you're looking at 720p proxies, dailies, in the cloud, again, I can be anywhere on the planet looking at this information in nearly real time. And I'm able to say, I've made a lot of dramedies, which are like these mixed tones sort of things. It's like, this felt too comedic, this feels like this. And the advantage being that we haven't completely torn down, the set, we haven't left the location. I had to go back and do a reshoot 12 days later. There was snow all over the ground. It's always it's always a whole thing. So I love being able to give that kind of feedback in real time. Multi-project management, feel like I have, a finger on the pulse of multiple projects in production and development, and that's very valuable, especially in scripted, a little bit in commercial. Absolutely. Okay, hardware. The nitty-gritty, the upper right photo is the Sigma FP. It's in sort of director's viewfinder mode here. One of the cool things about the FP is that you can adapt the native L mounts to PL, EF, my personal two favorites, and then you can add the actual glass that you're using to shoot the movie to it, and it becomes a great director's viewfinder. You can see multiple aspect ratios, the whole deal. So for us today, we're using the FP camera. We're going into the Ninja 5, and we're using the Atomos Connect. It's not that complicated a thing to set up, right? I could have powered this different ways too. I could have put, they make base sort of power stations. I think it's called the Titan from Anton Bauer, for example, that connects between the camera to the tripod. It could be powered that way. It would make this a little bit more minimal. But, since I'm a cine guy, I'm like, I want to make this the biggest possible rig possible. So here you go. Built for impressiveness, maybe not built for sprinting through the jungle in a wet environment or something. So I have a HDMI cable out of the side. It's going in to the Atomos. And let me see if I can probably power this on. Gold mount battery on the back. And then one of the things I love about the whole Atomos ecosystem here is you hit record on the side. I'm not getting input here. Perfect. Color temperature, nailed it on the first go. It's like, I don't even know, -7 green or something. All right, so we're hitting record on this, and it's showing us in the upper left if it's uploading. I'm not connected to the internet right now, but it's really very easy. This is totally small for you guys in the back, but the point is I'm picking my Wi-Fi connection, my Scalera, Mr. Net, bonded hotspot connection, T-Mobile hotspot is what I used in the desert. You connect to available network, you connect to the Atomos cloud, and once you're there, let's see, I can probably show this to you over here too. All right, so you see my Sigma FP connected in the Atomos Cloud Studio. And it's as simple as plugging in this long string of letters that you see there called your AID designation. And then you see Moon, Tobacco, and Fedora. You plug those in and you're connected into Cloud Studio. So your camera's in the studio, your camera's in the cloud, Cloud Studio. And then you got to decide, okay, what's my destination? Now, for me, I'm going to Frame.io. You could obviously go live to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch. You have a few other options in there, but for me, I'm going to Frame.io because I want to be collaborating with my team. So you can see, let's see. Okay, great. So this is what I was shooting in the middle of the desert and then uploading to Frame. Has anyone used Frame.io before, actually? Yeah? No other Frame.io fans? Yeah, two? Okay, maybe we talk a little bit about Frame.io for a second. Frame.io is great because I can say, desert, this is hard to do backwards. Desert shot, not my favorite. Great, you always get those like, cool, I'm already in the desert, I've already shot this, great feedback, random person on the team. Yes, desert shot, not my favorite, fine. And that's tied exactly to that time code. There you go, you see it in the upper right. You can also draw directly on the footage, which I love, there we go, down here. So, again, I don't work for Frame.io, but this is probably my favorite collaboration tool for all of these various reasons. You can circle stuff. Anyway, so you get the idea, right? You can do this on a feature-length film. You can do this on an individual clip basis. But this is one of my favorite tools lately. I mean, something you'll notice up here, too, is it's capturing the metadata out of the camera, really key for relinking later. And, again, this shot took about 8 seconds, and, no NDs with me at the time, so I shot that all the way stop down. Great. Okay, so for me personally, connecting to Frame.io, there's also other devices you can use to bridge that gap between the camera and the cloud, and even between the camera and, for example, Frame.io. So we're using the Atomos Connect here today, but you can use encoders from our friends at Teradek, Red as an integrated solution, Fujifilm has an integrated solution. Filmic Pro on your phone, if you've messed around with that, can feed directly to Frame.io. Sound Devices does, and there's a few more as well. Let's see here. Yeah, for Teradek, I think my favorite is probably the Serve 4K and the Cube 655. Those, exactly what it sounds, sort of a matte black cube, just like, you know, a Bolt 6 or a Bolt 4K. One of the reasons I like the Atomos Ninja 5 for this solution is it gives me this high bright monitor as well. So you got to make those decisions. Do I need this monitor? Would I rather just have that cube, you know, next to my Venice 2 or whatever? And then internet connection. So let's see here. You obviously need an internet connection, and I've devoted a whole slide for this in a second, but it's a bit of a thing, and we can't pretend that that infrastructure per country varies, but this is obviously a key part of this, so I'm going to touch on that a little bit more in a second. Back to the FP for a moment, though. Full frame, 24.6 megapixels. There's also a, you know, big cousin called the FPL. That's 61 megapixels. Again, L mount, I mentioned some of these things, 12-bit, Cine DNG RAW, and then that director's viewfinder mode that you saw in earlier. Also, feel free to hit me with any questions. If any of this sounds insane at any moment, believe me. This is my buddy Alex from T-Mobile, and he's going to help me talk about the internet connection types. So Alex got me it's a T-Mobile hotspot. It's about $200, and it was $50 a month for this hotspot. Tiny little sleek looking brick, and that was what I was using to connect in the desert. The pros and cons of that are obviously T-Mobile coverage, right? That's the thing. So you can check that in advance, or you can do a bonded internet solution from, again, there's a few different players in this space, but my favorite, Scalera, Mr. Net. Teradek has a solution called the Prism Mobile. Bonded internet, essentially you have a couple SIM cards in there, or even you're connecting to your local Wi-Fi in a studio, but you get a SIM card from, say, Verizon and Sprint and T-Mobile. The idea being that as you traverse the planet filming whatever it is you're filming, you're going to enter a better area for Sprint, better area for T-Mobile. You might be in a good area for both. You might be on studio Wi-Fi. And bonded just meaning that you're able to kind of switch between those better connections. I personally haven't tried Starlink, but kind of a obvious solution here as well. And yeah, actually you see that T-Mobile hotspot in the bottom right. Back to the software side for a moment. So I showed you that screen in Cloud Studio earlier from Atomos, and obviously you can have multiple devices there. One of the things that Atomos does is they split their Cloud Studio into multiple tiers. So that's something you need to consider as well if you're looking to set up this technology. The free tier is a 720p proxy upload. They do have tiers that allow for 1080 uploads as well. You can add up to a certain amount of devices, but you can see that's kind of how it's throttled or changed between plans. So camera to Cloud Studio, and for me, I went to Frame.io, but there are other places you can go. It's, up to you. But that was the part that took, seconds. That was really, really, really easy, not complicated. And it has to be said, we're using the Sigma FP today, but look, the Connect module, the Ninja 5, can be used on other cameras as well. It has HDMI out, or even SDI. You're good to go. So back to Frame.io. So you saw that a little bit, but in the upper right, you have, again, all the camera metadata with each of my shots. So it's a tool integration for Frame.io. So Frame.io is a destination. They're now also providing the cloud support as well. So you could go directly from a couple different cameras to Frame.io, with Frame.io being your cloud provider. That's another option, something to consider. You just have to kind of see the pros and cons. It might be purely a financial decision. It might be, you have a million Ninja 5s, and it's very easy just to add this back Connect module. That could be a conversation that you're having on the team. Yeah, and I've been using these review tools on Frame.io for years and years and years. And one of the things that's changed for me is who I'm hiring, honestly. It's like we kind of think, well, used to think, okay, geographically, the best people for job are in my 3-block radius in my city. It's like that isn't actually how that works. So I have sometimes graphic designers in San Francisco, composers in London, and it makes everyone feel like they're part of the same project. One of the other things I love about Frame.io as a destination for Camera to Cloud is actually this idea of buy-in, which is interesting, right? We common sort of production workflow. We do we do production, and we do post. And I'm always like ramp up in production, and we finish the movie, and we're all excited. And the offline editor comes on, and the online editor comes on, and they're like, "How's the movie? Was it fun?" Because they weren't there. They weren't in the Alps or whatever. And that, and then I have to be like, yeah, I'm exhausted now. But yes, it was so fun. You're gonna love working on this movie. But if they're seeing the footage populate in Frame.io as a helicopter shot comes around the mountain onto the lake, then they feel like they're part of it. Because honestly, budgets don't always allow, at least on some of my shows, to be in the with me. So I love having post people in the field, but sometimes you just can't do it. You can also do review tools. You can put your logo on there. It's just a great presentation for client-facing needs. For internal teams, you can split the review link. You can send all the internal files. Everybody's different. Some people will freak out if you send them 350 clips. Their minds will explode. I, however, like that. Some people hate that. So you could send a string out, for example, of a scene to somebody external. It's just you have options. And yeah, it's not just for Camera to Cloud. You can put a memory card in. You can upload footage into Frame.io. And they have various tiers, usually tied to the amount of storage that they're providing for you. So it's not 100% linked to Camera to Cloud. It's just something that lately I've been very excited about and I've been utilizing as much as possible. Not edit bay dependent. I just worked on this project actually where we had this gigantic combat fight scene. And I had an editor that's fantastic with like dialogue and pacing and ramping up to the moment. And look, I think they would agree that when people start punching each other, special effects, that they're just not the person for that. And that's fine, no judgment, but they're in different places from the person working on the pace of the project. They also have really great integrations on the Frame.io side with Adobe Premiere. Immediately pops to mind. Frame.io is an Adobe company, so that makes a lot of sense. But you just go, it's like, it's workstations in the upper right, if there's any Premiere users out there, and you go to the, I think it's called Frame by Adobe maybe, something like that, and you go down to workstations. Okay, I've touched on, there's a couple limitations that I want to get out of the way and have a conversation about. Local infrastructure is a thing. Middle of the pandemic, hired by the Oprah Winfrey Network to do a series of biographical pieces on sort of famous musicians. It got to the point where I was exposed to people like Wyclef Jean and Usher and all these guys. Like, look, you need to put your Ethernet cable router, and it needs to be router point 1, and it got crazy. Because for a while, the various networks were like, no one can go in the house. Great, no one can go in the house. Phenomenal. Used 24-70 Sigmas with autofocus on for the time in my career, I think. I'm very manually focused in my and it was absolutely nuts. So they would plug in the Ethernet. I would see the connection come up in this Teradek cloud service called Core, and I would tell usually like an assistant who's already in the house, usually like a second cousin, someone who lives there, to all of these things, episodes with probably 35, 40 different contributors all over North America. And it was a heavy situation. And if you watched any like late night television at the time, Bears of the world, et cetera, and everyone had this exact same conversation. You have to point that you have to make and then I had them light themselves. It was totally nuts. Felt like I was tech support for about 90 minutes. And some massive worldwide celebrities are not. And you find out real quick who thought that was cool and who thought this was way beneath. And I just said, like, look, global pandemic, please bear with me, tech support for this. So that Oprah Winfrey Network show taught me a lot about some of this stuff. It also taught me about the local infrastructure issues very wildly from city to And there's a political element to this, there's a spending on infrastructure element to this, but I want to talk about this. This is probably one of the main things that as filmmakers we have no control over. It just is what it is. Some people bought the best router in the world, some people understand tethering off of their phones, some people don't. It was a whole thing. Which, I've actually also done this tethering off of a mobile hotspot. So that is totally doable, especially with a 720p short clip. One of the things that Atomos does that's actually a fantastic solution is they do something called progressive upload. And why that's cool is, say you're running on like an hour interview, it's been, the clip has been uploading in the background throughout. So you cut at 60 minutes, and it takes just a little bit to catch up, because it's at like 80% at that point, right? So that's a really great solution from Atomos, progressive upload. They're not too forward-facing in their marketing materials about that, but I think that's incredibly cool. And one of the reasons that this specific hardware situation here is one that I really get conceptually, and one that I really like. I'm just very into this setup here. You're going to find other ways to do this. As I said, there's all the Teradek solutions, et cetera, et cetera. And the Serve Pro, Cube 655, and those work too. It's just you're going to find your best way to do this, and that's fine. Okay, yeah, proxy limitations. So if you get the highest tier of Atomos Cloud Studio, you're getting like 30 megs, 30 of HD per second, which is maybe fine if you're doing event coverage or maybe some types of breaking news. What it's not fine is like projecting on an IMAX screen in downtown Los Angeles. It's not good for that. And right now it's proxies going to the cloud, okay? I'll understand that, because I think in some marketing material they'll be like, 6K camera, et cetera, and you're like, oh, okay, must be 6K files in the cloud. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's proxies. So a hypothetical workflow might be, I'm running up the side of the mountain, I'm sending proxies to various contributors, but I'm still taking the memory card home to the hotel, I'm still dumping that footage, but they're still editing. So they're figuring out the timing. They're saying, look, we don't have an end of this segment, we don't have a beginning of that segment. All that can still happen. In fact, timecode is being translated as well into Frame.io. And then I have my drive, my normal SSD, spinning disk, whatever your favorite brand is, and you're sending that to the editor, and they're relinking everything. If you're an editor, you've relinked stuff before, you know how that is. All the metadata is the same. It's all timecode synced. You're good to go. I'm a producer and a DP. That's not my space, but I want to make it clear that it is a doable thing, and I also want to make clear that you're not sending 8K files right now. The other part of this that we should talk about is just the costs of cloud storage. I mean, look, some of you guys work for like cloud storage providers, and you have all sorts of thoughts about that. Again, not my area, but we can all see the different pay tiers. And on most things I do, I'm immediately in the most premium tier. Not because the project's the most premium project, it's because I just am shooting a lot of content. So that's tricky. So it becomes, from a producing perspective, a real question of cost. You gotta be really, really careful that you're not spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars sending a ton of proxies. And you can see where it gets crazy really fast. For example, Atomos is like, oh yeah, you can have multiple devices connected being sent to the cloud. Super exciting, but each Ninja 5 with Atomos Connect is connected to a camera. And when you get into a multi-camera situation, you need to have a really, really good sense of how long is this concert, how long is this interview. You might upload proxies into Frame.io. You might do a string out, for example, and then you might take that out of Frame.io really very quickly. You might. It depends. And of course, Frame.io has enterprise solutions and all these things. So, and areas I'm not familiar with, I'll let somebody from the Frame.io team speak to that. They're here at the Adobe booth, and I have their information at the end of the presentation. You should definitely go talk to those guys. I also encourage you to talk to the Atomos guys and the Sigma folks as well. All right. As with most things, whose job is this? Who should be trained to do this? Why should they be trained to do this? I have met with various levels of resistance throughout bringing up this conversation with ACs, with DITs. And I think we went through a little bit of this when we got into LED volume technology, because suddenly there's somebody on set who now is like an Unreal Engine, aficionado. And then, you got to separate the camera from the volume, and you see the banding and the LED walls, and it's a whole conversation. And I would guess the same person you have managing your LED volume workflow maybe shouldn't be the same person that's managing the camera to cloud workflow, not because they're not capable, but because those are very distinct jobs. So, whose job is this? Right now in my projects, it's my job. And that's been fine because I'm a techie and I like this stuff, but this may not be for you. You might want to have the peace of mind handing it off to somebody else. Not complicated to set up. What I think the peace of mind comes from is just checking the various internet connections in the case of like a bonded situation where you're between Verizon and Sprint and T-Mobile, right? Because you're going to find gaps in coverage just like you would on any mobile device. And there's something to, and honestly, it's maybe even a little bit political, set politics, just someone just being like, oh yeah, we're in a bit of a gap here. In about a minute, we're going to be in T-Mobile, blah blah blah, because you have no control over where the cell towers were built. But having an answer that, oh, we're in a dead spot here, can be very valuable to network executives, to clients, agency people, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just having somebody who has an answer is for some reason very important when you're working with C2C. So could it be so I would say if your DIT is primarily functioning as a person who takes memory cards and puts them on a SSD, then yeah, you could probably add a camera to cloud workflow to their job anyway. I think that's fully valid. If they're a DIT who's doing color timing, matching cameras, dumping footage, I think they might kill you if you add camera to cloud on top of everything that they're doing. And it's like we got to adapt. I do think this is the next thing, and I think a better place to be for all of us is to just be super excited about this technology and just start at a kind of curious and inquisitive place versus massive upfront resistance, which I've gotten a couple times too. So, up to you. So DIT, is it a specialized role? And this gets into kind of my final point here actually on my slides. If you embrace this technology in its current stage, in its current iteration, I would argue that you are infinitely hireable from a freelance perspective. Just knowing even 50% of the things I've gone over in the last 40-ish minutes here is so key, because that's a unique selling proposition, right? Because if you can volunteer that you know this information, and many people in the industry currently do not have the capability to execute on this thing, it's okay, that's because it's the technology in its infancy, but it makes you infinitely hireable. It's a weird career trajectory. For example, if I'm a director of photography and I end up doing camera to cloud on a Marvel movie, that would be a weird pivot for me, and I'd have to find some way to work back into the camera department that I know and love or onto the producing side. But I think as a just straight up stepping stone to projects you want to be working on more, this is an incredibly valuable idea. Does everyone get that? Because if you forget everything else about what I said, this should be the thing to walk away from. Because there's going to be people with hiring capabilities that are going to hear these buzzwords and be very excited about camera to cloud, and they're going to want to do this tomorrow, 100%. It was like that. Again, I go back to 3D with like integrated fixed lenses in 08, 09. For some reason, I ended up shooting a lot of 3D then. Some of it actually with this guy, Thierry, right there. And it was absolutely nuts. But just because I knew how to execute this meant there were opportunities. And I got to go to places like Istanbul and Chernobyl, et cetera, New York Fashion Week for a hot second, very early on, because I was like the 3D guy. So my argument here is become the camera to cloud person in your specific organization. And a lot of you are going to have your favorite camera platform, probably. You know, some of you guys in corporations and companies, you've already purchased the hardware. For me, I love FPs. I have a bunch of FPs. This is my preferred workflow. But if it has HDMI out or SDI out, it'll work with whatever you have in-house. That's the other very, very cool part of it, because the ramp-up costs aren't as crazy as you might think. Let's see here. So the FP, Brian, how much is the FP right now? Like 1,800?
Actually, buy that with our stand.
Is that officially announced? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the whole shebang, basically everything here minus like lens, yeah? Okay, yeah, if you don't mind double checking on that. Okay, so as of like 11 minutes ago, I guess, there's now a SKU that is basically this. So I, knew this was coming. I didn't know that it was live right now. Maybe Google that, and so I'm not lying to all these nice people. But the point is, it's coming very soon, and you heard it here first. So the point is, you could do this exact thing by purchasing that exact SKU on your B&H's and Atomas if you're in North America, and then hit up your favorite dealer if you're outside of the States. And okay, I'm going to go to questions now, I think, actually. But first, I'm going to direct you to a few places. So Brian, who's my buddy in the front row here, is going to be at the Atomos booth in Central Hall. Maybe take a still of all these things, but Brian's going to be available right now to answer some Sigma FP questions. For additional Frame.io questions, definitely hit up the Adobe booth. I recommend talking to JJ. Tell him Graham sent you. And then for additional Atomos questions, there's about 1 million people at the Atomos booth that you should all talk to right now. So for a little bit here, I'm going to bring Brian up in a second. We can talk about FP as a camera platform. But initial questions, concerns, really anything. This is a safe space. There's no judgment here, seriously. Questions about camera to cloud. Does it seem like a doable thing? Are you deeply concerned coming out of this presentation? Yeah, so metadata is coming from the FP over HDMI into the Ninja 5 Connect and going to Cloud Studio, ending up in Frame.io. That's right. And then you're able to relink your media in your favorite, NLE at the end. Yeah. Yeah. It was 5G in the middle of this desert. Let me actually go back to that slide because I get very tickled by that. That is just absolutely nuts to me. Yeah, so I got 5G here. And this is the truth. I did, non-scientific counting, 8 seconds between here and my Frame.io app right here. Results will vary, but there was nothing around. I saw no cell towers. It seemed like I just went to the coolest, most deserty looking place I could. It really was like throwing a dart at Google Maps, and then I went there. So, yeah, that's, you just really, and that's maybe an argument for it being a specialized role, because I think if I was doing this for a gigantic production, I would check coverage, either Starlink coverage, mobile coverage or something, in a specific area before heading out there to shoot in that place. And a little bit like, being the drone cinematographer or whatever, there's places where you just can't do this, probably. And I'm not sure where those places are, but there's probably somewhere out there where this would just, you wouldn't have had a connect. But, give it time. That is a really interesting question. Let's see this. That's actually a great Atomos question, but that wasn't grayed out. Yeah, so that's a good, check out the Atomos booth, ask them that exact question, because I'm very curious about that. But yeah, it's not grayed out or anything. So my guess is you're allowed to do it and you just toggle on and off. Yeah, all right, so yeah, you're saying very doable, cool. All right, other questions? Yeah, we can do, yeah. Without being an editor, I want to be very clear that director of photography, producer. Hand off cards to DIT, go to Premiere. I'm sorry, that was a boring answer. And then work with my favorite editor. Yeah, sorry, I wish there was a more exciting workflow answer there. Yeah, you had a question. Yeah, another good question. Yeah, so it batch lists in order. So it'll go, say, clip 1, 2, 3, 4, and say you go through a bridge for some reason, and then it'll just stop and then you'll start with 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4 on the other side. So yeah, and that happens without anybody touching anything. And one of the things I really like is that real-time feedback in the upper left, the UI on the Ninja 5. You see it go green. Also, with the red border, if you've used any Atomos products, that still happens. And then you see the queue of all of the various files uploading. And you see all that. And that was really important to me because I hate, we've all hit record on something and been like, is it going anywhere? I don't, So in that case, you get that immediate feedback. Other questions? Yeah. So your question is, could you do, yeah, you could send whatever live track, you're doing in Unreal, and you could send out to a Ninja connected to an Atomos Connect, because it's just a different source at that point. I guess it would be just a, PC or Mac at that point. So yeah, you could do that. Yeah, you can do all of the, the live keying and stuff like that. That's a little out of my skill set, but it is, just think of it as another source. So in my brain as a DP, I'm like, okay, it's another camera, You're welcome. All right, guys, anything else? I'm really curious though, what would you use Camera to Cloud for in your own workflow? Does it have a place in your workflow? Does anyone have a thought on that? I'm seeing some nods. I'm just curious, how would you use it as a client-facing thing? Would you use it as avoiding a active combat, like some people here? Yeah, client, you do agency stuff? It kind of handles that issue that I have all the time, mostly on like agency stuff, where it's like 9 people in Video Village, right? We've all been there, all around the same monitor. I think, there's a comfort level that you'll need to build with them, because they'll be like, wait, my YouTube videos stutter. Will this be okay? But I think especially on branded campaigns, I did a thing for Hublot, which is a watch company, and it was like 15 shots, but 15 very VFX heavy shots. That's the perfect thing to do this for, because it wasn't hour-long clips. It was some very VFX things. It was like, here's the sun, and then here's the fake waves. It was all of that stuff. And the VFX person was somewhere in France. And how they were doing it is I'd be like, hey, what does the waves look like in this shot? And they would send me like a little draft, like a JPEG in real time. And I would be standing next to the shot with the waves, and I'd be like, it was really tricky, actually. So that's, that was really hard. Anyway, other stuff? All right, Brian, you want to talk about FP for a second?
Let me first clarify, the bundles are live. You search, I don't know, all of them. They started very...
Just now you had to pull out an Excel sheet to look at the different bundles?
Yeah, it was easier to look on this.
Got it. Okay, and was it B&H and Autorama, or who did you check? Cool. Yeah, and other FP stuff. Anyone have a question about this specific camera? So it's right here. It's under £1, 12-bit Cine DNG RAW. You could also go out to like a Samsung T5 out of a USB slot. So one of the things, which I think undersells the camera a little bit, I've been using the FP for, is putting it in just crazy places where I don't personally want to go, like fixing it to the wings of airplanes or under cars. Actually, I just put one pointed at a wheel of a solar-powered vehicle, but under the car. It's it's also a aluminum housing. It could take a little bit of a beating, but it's just so tiny that I've been putting it everywhere that I don't really want to. So honestly, that's been my use case for the FP specifically. And it's, I think, affordable enough from a professional producer movie making perspective that you can rent like 10 and it's an okay thing from a cost perspective. Everyone's ideas about what is okay from a cost perspective, very different, but I've had half a dozen on projects and put them in the craziest places, like Dutch angles, stuck it in the ceiling, put it a little closer to the mud when I would like, what I would care for, but yeah, anything else high level about the FP, Brian, we should mention? And it's it's 8-bit, so at that point. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen people intercutting them with minis, with some Sony products as well, and the Yeah, and I personally do the SSD workflow when I'm like sticking it to the side of something, just as a little bit smaller. And it's a hybrid, it's a true hybrid camera too.
Stage on optical viewfinder, director viewfinder, we just added sort of units to that.
Yeah, and I mean, I have I want to say maybe a Panavision, is it H series, I think, in the upper right, connected to the L mount. So that, for me, in the director's viewfinder mode, which is what Brian's alluding to, that's the most exciting thing, because without throwing any lovely apps under the bus, it isn't the same glass that you're shooting with, obviously. Yeah, so that is, yeah.
Scout with video, size, still, it's a great little on top of that.
Yeah.
But to me, it's an under, fully getting out there, it's a quirky little lava.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say absolutely quirky camera, but then you see the 12-bit Cine DNG RAW, and then you're like, okay, not that quirky. This looks incredible. So file sizes are big in that particular instance, but I mean, oh my gosh, for commercial stuff, smaller clips, that's the only mode that I personally shoot in. It's that 12-bit RAW, absolutely insane, and full frame. I mean, in that package, which is incredible. And I mean, shout out for a few other accessories here, actually, that we should maybe just touch on real quick. So there's a company in Poland called 8Syn that makes the cage on here. That might be my favorite cage solution. Actually, you can probably see the logo on this side. Is it over here? Yeah. So 8Syn, I think it's pronounced, and I have some carbon fiber 15mm rods on there, and then just a gold mount plate on the back that's going into a dummy battery in the FP, and then a dummy battery in the Ninja 5. So simple. I was an AC for like 11 seconds, and no one was ever like, wow, you're an incredible cable manager. So, I mean, I'm sure some of you have some notes on the cable management, but that's fine. Cool. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming.